Hey Lumineers, welcome back to Atlanta. I'm Liam, this is Brandon, and behind us is where all the magic is happening, where the top players are battling it out for the top prizes we mentioned earlier. We just saw two incredible matches in the round of 64. Just a reminder, all these players have played 9 rounds yesterday. They just played a game today. They're playing at the top of their game with some excellent decks, and we're just seeing some amazing top-tier Lorcana play. So we're through the round of 64. We're down to 32. Brandon, remind us what these players are playing for at this point.
Yeah, this might be the most important round of the top 64, to be honest, because after top 32, the winner of top 32 will go into top 16, and at that point earn their invite for the North American Continental Disney Lorcana Championship, which I know all of these players are itching to earn. On top of that, they will also get one of the Rapunzel playmats, which is it's foiled and it looks very beautiful. It's of the Rapunzel promo art for this challenge. But man, I know I've talked to some of these players as they're coming out of their matches, and they are all itching so bad for these invites.
I know, it's exciting. Imagine being invited to the first, national championship for Lorcana. It's really exciting. So this is really it.
Yeah.
And we have some great matches to show you. We're very excited.
Yeah, and to guarantee that invite this early, you don't have to worry about any of the other challenges. You just lock it in already.
Let's go and compete for the promos.
Yeah, but with that, we have another really exciting match up for you guys. It should be another.
But first, we have some brackets to show.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Which I'm
Thank
pretty
you.
excited about. Yeah, no, it's really great. You all, I know you all have been wondering who's left in, who are we going to see over the next few rounds, and we're going to show you who's left competing right now.
All right, we're starting with the Rapunzel bracket. You guys can see the first round here of the different decks that have shown up here. And we actually have this really cool thing where as the rounds go further on, you can see which inks are guaranteed to play. So for instance, the match between Kendall and Yi are both Ruby Amethyst. So that means in the Octo Finals, there's going to be a Ruby Amethyst player. And then with Zan and Keith, both are playing Amber Steel. So, in the Octo Finals, there's going to be a Ruby Amethyst Steel Song match.
It's coming. Here we have the Maleficent bracket. Again, you can see which inks are likely to move on. A little less certainty here. We do know there's going to be some Amethyst in the Octo Finals there. Zach Bivens is a player we've seen a couple times already on cameras, playing Mark Landers with a Ruby Amethyst deck. But yeah, this is a look at the Maleficent bracket. We have 2 more to show you.
Yeah, this is the Elsa bracket, and tell us in Twitch chat if you recognize some of these names. I know that I'm recognizing a bunch of these names as established card players, either in this game or in other games, but we have quite a diverse list here of people playing. We have Ivan that you saw play just a second ago, progressing. He's going to play Matthew in this next round. We also have another Steel Song Mirror right there that's going to move on into the Octo Finals, and then Brad and Joshua playing out the Emerald Steel Ruby Sapphire match with Christopher and CJ playing the Sapphire Steel and Ruby Amethyst matchup as well.
Yeah, look at that Sapphire Steel deck sneaking in here into the top brackets. We haven't seen many of those on camera, but I'm excited to see it represented here.
Absolutely.
And here we are with the Cinderella bracket. This is the last of the 4 brackets we'll show you. And here, a heavy dose of Emerald Steel, all clustered here.
Yeah, it's crazy to see that there will be a guaranteed Emerald Steel player in the quarterfinals. You can guarantee that. And, Liam, I hope that we can get through this by midnight.
Yeah, I know. Otherwise, this bracket's going to turn into a pumpkin.
Yeah, and then none of them will progress.
Now, I think the match we're going to be bringing you next is from this bracket. I think we're going to take a look at Deborah Kowalski versus Dalton Sparks there, an Emerald Amethyst deck against a Ruby Sapphire deck. I know we've seen that match, but this is a great matchup. I'm excited to watch it. And let's take you there.
Yeah, let's move right on into the match. Honestly, I'm excited to get into this one after the last one.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. Here we go. Now we're bringing you this in turn 2. So we've already seen the turn 1 plays here. Typical openings. I think nobody's surprised by what we're seeing on board. We have a Merfolk on turn 1 there from Deborah, an aggressive play. This deck wants to gain lore early, and so it's got that Merfolk on the board to get that lore out before Dalton can remove it. And then a Popsicle, of course, is a great turn 1 play for Dalton, getting that extra card and getting an item on the board, also known as Flaversham food.
Flaversham food. Flaversham loves his popsicles.
God,
I guess he gets overheated in the toy shop, deconstructing things and using them as part hearts for others. I want to give a little shout out here. One of the things that I really love about the Disney Lorcana trading game is just how diverse the community is here. And to see Deborah as a woman that's here in the top 32 of this 2,000 person tournament is really awesome to see. I know in the history of other TCGs, it's pretty male dominated. So like shout out to Deborah and her run today with Emerald Amethyst.
Yeah, it's a great point. I will mention, as you point out, Brandon, TCGs at the top level have traditionally been, not quite as diverse as we'd like. And one of the things the Ravensburgers said when they made this game is they want to make it appeal and accessible to everybody. And that's one of their goals. So, yeah.
Yeah, it just goes to show that no matter who you are, you've got a shot at one of these regionals. You can just show up, play Lorcana, and you might find yourself at the top tables.
Absolutely. There we have Deborah questing with the merfolk, bouncing the merfolk, and able to play it again safe from that queen.
Yeah, honestly, pretty stereotypical openings for this. I feel like these are just textbook what you expect to see, both from the Ruby Sapphire and the Amethyst Emerald side of the game. We, of course, see another textbook play, Fishbowl and Quill on 3. I know Dalton's happy to see that. Fishbowl and Quill lets you exert the Fishbowl and Quill to put any card from your hand into the inkwell face down. It doesn't have to be inkable. It can be uninkable. We'll see Dalton decide what he's trying to put in. He puts in a Queen of Hearts, but Deborah doesn't know that. That's another really great thing about Fishbowl and Quill is your opponent doesn't get to see what you ink, and you can use that ink the turn that it's played. So we see here Dalton playing another popsicle with the ink that he used with Fishbowl and Quill.
Absolutely. I want to point out, too, Queen playing a very important function here. This Queen is usually in these builds. It's purely an anti-aggro card. It's in there partially for this matchup and other aggro matchups because without it, Deborah is free to use that merfolk, several turns in a row to gain lore, and that's really what this deck needs to do in this control matchup is develop a significant lore lead early. And so Dalton, knowing who he was playing against, probably altered his hand pretty aggressively to find one of these queens, enabling him to shut down that line and forcing Deborah to bounce the merfolk back to her hand if she wanted to save it.
Yeah, and in preparation with that, we do see an Arthur being played, which is a card that I don't think you normally see in these Emerald Amethyst decks. Arthur is a 1/3 card that when exerted, you can when quest, you can bounce another character and then gain 2 lore when you bounce the character. So in this case, Arthur could quest and then bounce the Madam M Snake back to Deborah's hand, and then you'd get a total of 3 lore. And I was about to say, luckily for Dalton, he does have the Fishbowl and Quill, so he can get up to 6 ink and play a Madam Medusa potentially to keep the Arthur, thank you. I just couldn't get to it right there. Keep the Arthur from questing and getting that huge lore lead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is interesting to see Arthur in here. As you pointed out, it is a card that you don't see in this list terribly often, but it does lean into the bounce theme that this deck is trying to do, and it does enable you to get lore very quickly if you have the right cards on table.
Yeah, we see Dalton also playing really well in that he knows he's playing against Emerald, and in pretty much any Emerald deck, you see Ursula Deceivers. And so Ursula Deceiver, when played, lets you look at the opponent's hand, and you can choose a song card out of their hand to discard. I saw a Be Prepared in Dalton's hand earlier, which is normally an uninkable card, so it normally stays in your hand until you can play it. So it is very susceptible to being discarded by an Ursula Deceiver, but because the Fishbowl and Quill can ink an uninkable card, Dalton knew that he should just go ahead and ink to Be Prepared. He's not going to need it anytime soon, and in case an Ursula Deceiver comes into play, that's not a card that Deborah's going to get to discard out of his hand.
Now, we pointed out Arthur is a card that you don't usually see in these Emerald Amethyst lists, and now we see another card that I don't think is run in the typical Ruby Sapphire list, and that's Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness. It is occasionally run, but more in decks built for challenging and not in decks built for the type of control that this deck normally does. So why don't you tell us a bit about Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness, Brandon?
Yeah, so Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness has an ability that says whenever one of your characters challenges another character, you can draw a card. So I actually really like this addition to the Ruby Sapphire deck because typically you have your Popsicles, you have your Hiram, Flaversham, and Genroot. That's primarily how you draw cards through this deck. You have other cards like Develop Your Brain, and some people like to also play Grammatala, that lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, choose one, and put the other one on the bottom. So there's ways to filter through your deck. But this Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness, can come down sort of as a surprise play. You can play her when you know you're planning to challenge your opponent's board, just as we saw Dalton do there, and then you can create the scenario where you remove a card from your opponent's side of the board, but you also get to draw a card. And as long as Queen of Hearts stays in play, then your opponent is really decentivized to exert any of their characters for any reason, because as long as Queen of Hearts is on board and your characters can challenge their characters, you're going to draw a card for every single time that happens. They don't even have to banish a character, they simply have to challenge it.
Yeah, it is a great alternate card draw engine for this deck. Deborah, of course, exerting her Merfolk and then knowing it's going to be remove, challenge, and give a Dalton a card, bounces it back to her hand, getting the Fox on the board, enabling her to replay it in the ready position.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits that Emerald Amethyst really has, is this Madam Mim package of cards that let you bounce cards back to your hand. It's another way to essentially keep your cards safe, because once you quest with them, you of course don't want them to be challenged, and for really cheap, high lore cards like Cursed Merfolk, it's really easy and inexpensive to quest with it, gain 2 lore, pick it back up, and then immediately play it back down again, and making it really hard for Dalton to interact with it in any way to keep you from continuing to push your lore lead.
Absolutely. So here we have a Judy Hopps. Judy Hopps serves as a kind of a Flaversham light in this scenario. Judy Hopps is a card, a 2/3 with 2 lore, and when she comes into play, you can banish an item to draw a card. Now, usually this is teched into these decks for 2 purposes. The biggest one is removing opponent's items. So in the mirror match, Dalton can banish Lucky Dimes or another item that is serving their opponent well. But in this scenario, he knows Deborah doesn't have any items in this deck usually. If there are, it'll be a huge surprise. And so using Judy Hopps for a little bit of light card draw, banishing his own popsicle to gain a card.
Yeah, I really like the addition of Judy Hopps here for that reason. It's really flexible. It helps you in your mirror matches, like you mentioned, to take out the Lucky Dimes. And then, of course, you can get the card draw, just like you said. I'm interested to see how this continues to progress, though. We see Deborah playing a Merlin Rabbit to draw a card. Merlin Rabbit lets you draw a card when it enters play and leaves play. And you can imagine with all the bounce things that you can do in this deck, like we mentioned earlier, that can get going pretty quickly if you start questing with your rabbit, picking your rabbit back up, playing it again. You're starting to draw a bunch of cards. But one thing I'm noticing is Deborah does not have a huge lore lead. She just got to 9, and Dalton has quite a lot of ink in his inkwell. This is really where the Ruby Sapphire deck starts to turn on. Once you get to these really expensive ink numbers, you can start playing cards like Bell Strange but Special and Tamatoa, or sometimes Gaston. And in this case, we see Scar, which I know is not what Deborah wants to see. Scar is a great answer to Deborah's board right now. Scar is an uninkable 7-cost card that has 6 strength and 5 willpower. He also has Rush and an ability, he has Rush, which means he can challenge the turn that he has played. And he also has another ability that says when he banishes a character in a challenge, he can re-ready. So you see Dalton doing this right now, challenging one character right after the other, being able to take out all of the cards that Deborah has exerted without actually having to use any of the other characters that he already had in play. Pairing that with the Queen of Hearts and being able to draw a card every single time that you challenge, I mean, Dalton is drawing a bunch of cards, he's removing the cards from Deborah's side of the board, and he's putting a ton of ink into his inkwell. He's sitting in a pretty nice spot, if you ask me.
No, I totally agree. You know, he's built up a nice board state, a good ink lead, and the one thing that he was really missing was some sort of card draw engine, looking for a Flaversham or something of the like. But having that Queen of Hearts there and getting 2 cards off that Scar feels really good.
We see Dalton thinking through his plays a little bit, deciding to sing How Far I'll Go with the Queen of Hearts. How Far I Go just lets you take a card. You look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You can put one into your hand, and then the other one goes into your inkwell, so just another way of ramping.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenging position for Deborah to be in here. You know, at this point in the game, she really is trying to scrape her way towards 20 lore, probably dropping high lore characters, you know, exerting them for a one-time quest, bouncing them if possible. But even if you're just questing and gaining 2 lore, that's getting you a little bit closer to victory, and she's really in a race at this point. The problem for her is doing that opens up her characters to challenges, and that gives Dalton cards, working him towards his win condition. And so it's a really difficult thing trying to figure out when she can be aggressive here without benefiting her opponent through card draw. But speaking of aggression, we see Pinocchio here, which is a 3 lore character that she plays for 2. It's an unequal card, but when you get it on the table, it is scary. Right now, Deborah is showing 4, 5, 6, 7 lore on the table, and at 11 lore, Dalton really has to deal with a couple of her cards to keep her out of goat striking distance, as it were.
Yeah, I really like what Deborah's doing right now. Dalton obviously has a Scar that he can use to challenge and banish a bunch of her characters. When he challenges and banishes a rabbit, Deborah's going to be able to draw a card, but Deborah's putting a ton of aggression on the board, like you said, Liam, and trying to force Dalton to play cards maybe he doesn't want to play. For instance, if Deborah gets enough characters on board to have a game win and push to 20, and Dalton can't interact with any of her readied characters, Dalton might be forced to be prepared. If Dalton has to be prepared, he's getting rid of this Queen of Hearts engine that he's built, he's getting rid of the Scar, and if he's not getting rid of the characters that are readied, like Pinocchio, gaining 3 lore, going up to 14 lore, could go up to 15 with the Maleficent Sorceress there, you start getting into Merlin Goat striking range.
Yeah, absolutely. For anybody who missed the last match, one of the things that any Amethyst deck, I think, in the meta can do is close out games with the Goat. Merlin Goat is a card that gains a lore when he enters play and when he leaves play. And you pair that with some bounce cards in this deck, and you can play the Goat, bounce it back to your hand, and if you have enough ink, potentially play it again, allowing you to gain a significant amount of lore in a single turn.
Yeah, and we see Dalton recognizing that he has to put the pressure on because he certainly doesn't want to resort to something like a Be Prepared. We see him play 2 Bell Strange But Specials, and those bells will have 5 lore on them each because Dalton has 10 ink or more in his Inkwell, and Bell Strange But Special has the ability that says she gains an extra 4 lore when you have 10 or more ink in your Inkwell. So he'll be able to quest for 10 lore at least next turn, not including all the other characters that are on board. If he has something like a Lucky Dime in hand, he can also use that to close out. And that's what Ruby Sapphire is just great at doing, is finishing the game very quickly with very large, overwhelming characters. We do see Deborah, though, responding to this by playing a Kit Cloud Kicker. Kit Cloud Kicker allows you to bounce an opposing character card that has 2 strength or less. Bell Strange But Special has exactly 2 strength, so she doesn't want Dalton to get 5 lore off of the Bell by questing with her, and that's where we see the Lucky Dime come in. Lucky Dime lets you exert it for 2 ink, and you can gain the amount of lore on the card, and that is going to be enough lore on Dalton's side of the board to close out game 1 against what I think was a favorable matchup for Deborah.
I think it is, but we say it's a favorable matchup, but both players have worked into their decks cards which you don't typically see.
Yeah.
Deborah working with Arthur's, and then she's got some Maleficents, which are some low to the ground, 1 cost 2 lore cards, which are a very aggressive line for this deck. And then of course the Queen of Hearts sensing weakness on the other side. So they're not the traditional builds I think you've seen. Nothing crazy. But this matchup is super interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah, and I'm kind of excited that they're different. I think you have to innovate a little bit when you walk into a room full of 2,000 people in a set that isn't exactly solved, but I mean, people knew that Amethyst Emerald was a strong deck. People knew that Ruby Sapphire was a strong deck, and there were some core cards that always go in those decks, and to see both of these players break outside of that, add stuff in that works for them, it's obviously paid off.
Absolutely, because both these players are here, and they're going to play a game 2, which we're excited to bring you.
Yeah, so let's go right into this game 2.
I'm excited to watch this. As we get started here, one of the things I want to talk about is this Emerald Amethyst deck. This is one of my favorite decks in this current meta, and I think it's really good in control. One of the things that this deck is trying to do is play kind of a 2-phased game, is the way I like to think about it. You want to get to an early lore lead, a high lore lead. You want to get to about 11 or 12, at least 10 lore by the mid game, because at some point against these control decks, there's just so many cards that can gain control of the board, whether it's Be Prepared or Scar, that you want to be prepared to lose control of the board by having a significant lore lead. At that point, you're playing for the goats, and you're playing to close out the game by dropping high lore characters, maybe questing of them once, but then you really want to use a goat bounce to kind of close things out. So in this early game, it is crucial that Deborah pushes her lore lead as much as possible before Dalton gets access to his removal spells.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we see her do here on turn 1, dropping a Cursed Merfolk, which is, I mean, we've talked about how strong the card can be aggressively. It has 2 lore and can quest, and then when challenged, forces your opponent opponent to discard a card. So it almost always pays for itself in a way by getting rid of one of your opponent's cards for the card that you played. We do see Deborah play an Ursula Deceiver to look at Dalton's hand, and Dalton had quite the hand of songs. He had 2 one-jump aheads, a How Far I'll Go, and a Be Prepared. I'm sure Deborah wasn't happy to see both of those one-jump aheads because that's one of the game plans for Ruby Sapphire. The very early games, you just ramp as fast as you can. That includes, if you can, playing a one-jump ahead on turn 2, hopefully with a Fishbone Quill on turn 3, which we do see in Dalton's hand as well. So it's not going to be very long before Dalton can start playing cards like Be Prepared. I think actually on next turn, if he plays a Fishbone Quill and can get 2 more ink into his Inkwell, on turn 4, he can actually play the 7-cost card, Be Prepared, and Deborah can put out as many characters as she wants and try to get as much lore as she can get. But Dalton understands that game plan that you just explained so well, Liam, of Deborah's going to want to come out of the gate running. She wants to get as much lore as possible, and he's making sure that he can get to his outs as fast as possible as well, so that he can start to slowly take control over the game, stabilize, and then finish the game quickly.
Absolutely. And, Ursula Deceiver, oftentimes you don't necessarily want to play it on curve, but in this case you do because you can pick that 2-cost card, but you also get access to your opponent's hand and you can look and see what they have. So Deborah, knowing that Be Prepared is coming now, being absolutely certain of it, can prepare for it to make sure that she is in fact prepared.
Yeah, and she's already down pretty low on cards in hand. She only has 3 cards in hand. We do see a Friends on the other side, and she does play Maleficent Sorceress to draw another card, but she is opting to ink the Friends on the other side, it looks like, and she's going to all-out quest with her cards, gaining a bunch of lore this turn, pushing her up into the double digits, which I like because, like you said, she probably knows that Be Prepared is coming next turn. She needs to get as much out of these characters as she can.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, it is going to be tough losing this board, and it is going to be uphill battle. But getting to 11 lore early is great, and then having Dalton play a Be Prepared, being forced to use significant cards from his hand with that Fishbone Quill to get to 7 ink, leaves Deborah as the first person to respond, and Dalton with a fairly empty hand after this is played.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we see here. Dalton playing the 7-cost song, Be Prepared, which will banish all characters on board, and usually is sort of bittersweet because it also will banish your characters on board. But in this case, Dalton only has items. He has 2 Popsicles and a Fishbone Quill, and so Dalton doesn't lose any characters, and Deborah loses all of hers.
That's true. And Fishbone Quill, I want to point out, great card, allowing you to ramp. But as we mentioned, the resources you're using are cards in your hand. And so Dalton right now looking for some card draw to allow him to get things on the board and get back in the game.
Yeah, but this is the part where Ruby Sapphire really starts to shine. Dalton has a lot of answers in Ruby that he can use to slow Deborah down. Deborah made a really good push on lore getting up to 11 here, but she has a pretty small hand. Honestly, the hand's not looking too great. There's a Merlin Mim Fox, there's a Madam Mim Fox and a Merlin Crab, and you don't... Bouncing your cards isn't the worst in this scenario, actually. You can quest with the snake, bounce the snake back so that it doesn't get banished the next turn with the fox if you want to. We'll see if Deborah decides to go with that play. And that's what we see, bouncing the fox back. This essentially keeps that lore that you just gained safe so that maybe next turn you can play the snake and potentially get even more lore out of it.
Absolutely. This is a game of, let's say, a game of inches at this point. Every lore gets Deborah just that much closer to the goat bounce combo to allow her to close out the game, and so she's really playing for that. But here we see the card draw that Dalton wanted. We see both the Judy Hops and the Harem come down, allowing him to draw 3 cards off those Popsicles, and this is really going to allow him to get back in the game. Yeah,
this is where we just see the Ruby Sapphire engine working. You've got the Hiram Flaversham there. You have quite a few items that he can use. Dalton's starting to refill his hand after having to put so many cards into his Inkwell through Fishbone Quill because he knew he would have to play that Be Prepared. Now he's finding all of the answers that he wants to find again. Deborah finding a really good card off the top, though, this Merlin Rabbit.
It's exactly what she wanted.
It's exactly what she wanted. When played, it is going to draw her a card, and when it leaves play, it can draw her a card as well. We know she's sitting on the snake that she just picked up, which she can bounce the Merlin Rabbit back to hand if she wants to draw a card and then replay the rabbit again and continue to draw more cards. And just like you said, we're getting to a point where Deborah is really trying to find these goats. She's trying to find these cards that can close out the game so that she can get to 20 lore before Dalton really takes over. Because if there's one thing we know about the Ruby Sapphire list is that when it wins, it goes from 0 to hero, or 0 to 20.
Indeed. So I also want to draw attention to Deborah's ink total here. I love this list because it's capable of being aggressive early and going wide, and Deborah playing a particularly aggressive version of this deck, which allows you to put a lot of cards out on board, get a lot of lore. The problem is those cards you're putting on the table are also cards you need to ink. And so Deborah's sitting on only 4 ink right now, hoping to leverage the rabbit as much as possible, because in the end game, you're hoping to have at least 6 ink on the board with this deck. Preferably 7. And one of the reasons is because that allows you to play a goat and to bounce the goat in the same turn, so it doesn't sit on the board vulnerable to being banished. So if you can play the goat and bounce the goat back to your hand with a snake, that's the best of both worlds. You get 2 lore, and that goat is sitting in your hand, able to play again. So Deborah right now hoping to maximize use of this rabbit, get some more cards not only to play, but perhaps put another ink or 2 in her inkwell, enabling that line of play in the later game.
Yeah, and Deborah's honestly running out of time. I feel like the more of these Ruby Sapphire games that I watch, you start to see patterns. One of those patterns is ramping really early in the game, then using your removal cards from Ruby once you have quite a lot of ink in your inkwell to stabilize, putting the Hiram Flaversham down to refill your hand after rushing to those high expensive answers, and then playing your threats. We see Dalton play a Tamatoa Shiny Crab that can grab an item from your discard, which is important because he also has an ability that says he gains an extra lore on his card for every item that's in play. And Dalton can bring back those Popsicles, play the Popsicles to draw a card, because Popsicle's a 1-cost inkable item that draws a card when played, and then he can use Hiram Flaversham to quest, banish the Popsicle, and draw 2 more cards off of Hiram. And before long, you'll start finding quite a few other items, one of those being Lucky Dime. The more items that are in play, the more that Tamatoa is going to quest, the more lore that he has on his card, the more you'll be able to use with Lucky Dime.
No, it's absolutely right. And Deborah there able to remove the Judy Hops, which gets rid of a high lore threat. But unfortunately, the key parts of that engine there that Dalton needs to make this endgame happen are Tamatoa and Hiram, because as you pointed out, the crab gets you an item, and then Hiram eats the item. And if it's a Popsicle, netting you 3 cards each one of those transactions. So hope to remove one of those. But one of the problems with Emerald Amethyst is there's just not a lot of targeted removal. There's a couple things at your disposal. One is Mother Knows Best, which allows you to send a character back to your opponent's hand, but I don't know that Deborah is running that card. It seems like more aggressive cards rather than those controlling cards. There's the Fox available, which can challenge an exerted character with its rush ability, and that's another option, but just not a lot available for Deborah to deal with Tamatoa or to remove Flaversham if he's not exerted.
Yeah, we even see the Merlin Crab on board for Deborah, which can give a character challenger +3 when it enters and leaves plays, and one of the strongest ways to challenge an opposing board in Emerald Amethyst is to play a Madam M. Fox in combination with a Merlin Crab, because then you can give your Madam M. Fox challenger +3, meaning that it can challenge for a total of 7 strength. But unfortunately, Tamatoa has 8 willpower, so even that isn't enough to banish the Tamatoa in one go. But it looks like Deborah is playing out as much as she can, trying to put a good amount of lore on board. We see the Maleficent biding her time, which is an unequal 1-cost 1/1 with 2 lore. So it's a very aggressive card, can push her closer and closer to that 20 lore mark that we keep talking about, hopefully so that she can find some goats and play them and close out this game before Dalton finds the Lucky Dime, which you know is inevitable, coming so that he can gain lore immediately with his high lore characters in his deck.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we saw last game was that this Ruby Sapphire deck can close games out very, very quickly with a lot of lore in one turn, using that Lucky Dime to do it. So Dalton is way behind on lore, but I think that's a position he's comfortable being in because he knows he can strike quick.
Yeah, and you see him using that Hiram Flaversham and Tamatoa engine that we talked about before even spending any ink. He's trying to draw as many cards as he can so that he can see if he finds any answers to Deborah's board outside of having to challenge, because I'm sure he wants to build up a really strong board as well. And of course, we see the Madame Medusa taking out the Maleficent, biding her time, saying, I don't want Deborah to be gaining any extra lore, especially 2 lore during a turn. And the Madame Medusa will challenge into the Merlin Crab. And the Merlin Crab would normally trigger and give something challenger +2, but it won't matter because it's only for the turn.
Absolutely. Here we have Belle Strange but Special coming in, as we saw last game. When 10 ink is on the board, she gains +4 lore, making her a 5 lore quester, and making Lucky Dime especially good. She's a very tempting Lucky Dime target. Kit Cloud Kicker coming in and kicking Belle back to Dalton's hand. I will mention, Kit is a fun card, I think, when we saw him spoiled. It just shows that in this game, Ravensburger is able to leverage not only Disney movies to bring us our favorite characters, but also Disney TV shows. Tailspin being a favorite of mine when I was a kid, and so seeing Tailspin characters make an appearance in the game, I think was so fun.
I was excited both to see Tailspin and DuckTales. There's quite a few DuckTales in the game as well, and so I was very excited to see, as you mentioned, Disney spread a little bit further out than just the movies, because I know there's plenty of characters that fans of Disney love and would love to see in this game. So it's really promising to think about. You start thinking, what other characters might we see coming in Disney Lorcana? It gets me really excited.
Absolutely. Dalton here spending a lot of ink to play Maleficent, taking out the cursed merfolk. It's a lot of firepower for an 0-1, but 2 lore is not at this point in the game when Deborah's sitting on 15 lore. Again, with the goat available, every single lore matters, and so Dalton choosing to take no chances in getting rid of that merfolk before they can do any damage.
Yeah, it's pretty silly when you think about playing a 9-cost character, Maleficent Monstrous Dragon, on this little 0-1,
Those
1-cost
poor unfortunate
merfolk.
souls.
Those poor unfortunate souls. But like you said, it goes to show just how important every lore is in this game. Dalton is very well aware that Merlin Goat is an Amethyst, and Deborah's playing Amethyst, and so if she can push herself up an extra 2 lore up to 17, she's only a few Merlin Goat bounces away from victory, and Dalton is doing a great job, honestly, of keeping Deborah's board under control while continuing to build his own. We've seen his lore start building slowly and slowly, extra even more as the game goes on. He's already up to 12 lore, and it won't be long before Dalton can close out this game. We see the Lucky Dime enter play. Like I mentioned before, it's an item that when exerted lets you gain the lore on a character's card.
And that'll do it. You know, all Dalton needed was an item, actually, any item, to give Tamatoa an extra lure in that scenario. He got the dime to, man, it's more than he needed, but allowing him to close out the game. And we saw at the end, Deborah with the goat in her hand. So she had effectively 1 more lure than we saw on the table.
Yeah.
If she had a little more ink, perhaps she could have worked a goat bounce, but so close, did what she wanted to do, but Dalton took it in the end.
Yeah, if there's anything we've seen between the last 2 matches, it's that Ruby Sapphire is really strong, even into ink matchups that it should be unfavored, into matchups that can go really fast. We see that some of the top Ruby Sapphire decks have teched towards this aggro matchup, and it's paying off for them. So maybe we'll see a Ruby Sapphire, further on in the bracket.
Absolutely. Both these decks, as you pointed out earlier, and Zach Bivens, who we saw multiple times, all made interesting choices going into this tournament, putting in some cards which I don't think we've seen in the average build. And so it just goes to show, if you're a Disney Lorcana player, don't be afraid to make changes to the deck to build something you're comfortable with and to make bold choices going into these big events, because you can be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, we're going to cut to a quick break and hopefully have an interview from Tannon after that. Then you will be joined by Jonty and Rebecca to cast the next match.
with Dalton, with fresh off his win in the top 32. You're going to be advancing into that top 16. Got to be getting a little nervous, maybe a little bit here. Ton of pressure on you for all these matches. How are you keeping an even head?
Honestly, the anxiety is just through the roof, but I played college sports, so I think that helps me kind of ease into it a little bit. Just stay confident and calm.
Yeah. Now, your matchup that we just watched here is one of the most classic matchups in this kind of game. You're more the bigger control deck kind of thing, and you're against the lower to the ground aggro-ish deck that's trying to flood the board right away. But in one of the games in particular that I watched, your deck did its thing. It had Quill early, and then it had Be Prepared a few turns early as well. And I just want to know for myself and everybody at home, how important is that in these kind of matchups, and is that always what your deck is trying to do?
Oh, especially in this matchup, it's just the most important thing. Quill is insanely strong at just powering out the Be Prepared, and there's just nothing that they can really do to combat that. So, yeah, Be Prepared is just so good.
Yeah, now, I was looking at your deck, and it looks like, the typical blue-red decks that we've seen here. We've seen Queen of Hearts in here, but you've got a little bit extra of that Queen of Hearts.
Yeah, I have the Shift Queen of Hearts. I can't remember the full name, but yeah, I brought it for that kind of matchup, the Emerald matchups, because they're always making you discard cards, and I just want extra card draw, and it's been really good so far.
Well, Dalton, you've been really good so far, so best of luck the rest of the day.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Tannon.